It wasn't the stray lipstick mark on a collar, nor the faint, foreign perfume scent clinging to his expensive wool coat. Those were the cliches Julian would have tried to hide, the clumsy giveaways that required immediate emotional confrontation. No, the first sign, the one that sealed his fate and set the clock ticking on our 15-year marriage, was the way the grout was cleaned in the master bathroom shower. I knew every millimeter of that house, every stain, every chip. We had lived in that house since before Julian's architecture firm truly took off, and I had personally overseen the meticulous care of the white subway tile. The grout had a very specific, almost imperceptible discoloration near the drain, a tiny shadow from a decade of hard water and time. One Tuesday morning, after Julian returned from an alleged 3-day business trip to Portland, that shadow was gone. The grout was bleached, scrubbed clean down to its original, sterile white. Julian never cleaned the shower. He barely noticed if the towels were the right color. The only reason that grout would have been scrubbed with such ferocious attention to detail was if a new woman, someone keen to impress or fastidious in her own right, had used that shower and been determined to leave no trace of her presence behind. This wasn't proof for a court of law. It was proof for Clara. And for Clara, proof didn't lead to screaming matches. It led to strategic planning. I stood in that shower for a full 5 minutes, running my finger along the pristine line of caulk, feeling the cold, hard realization settle into my bones. He wasn't just cheating. He was complacent, believing that I, Clara, the corporate law whiz who had happily stepped back to manage his burgeoning empire and raise our non-existent children, was too blinded by domesticity to notice anything beyond the grocery list. That complacency was his most fatal error. I didn't confront him. I simply smiled wider that morning, complimented him on his renewed energy, and poured him a second cup of coffee. Internally, however, I had already opened the first spreadsheet. Operation Clean Slate. I needed data. I needed history. I needed to know the parameters of the damage before I decided the appropriate response. The quiet hum of the house, the sterile clean of the grout, and Julian's oblivious cheerfulness only served to sharpen my focus. I knew exactly where to look next, having spent the last decade building the very financial infrastructure he relied upon. The game had begun, and Julian didn't even know he was playing. The second phase required patience and a deep dive back into a world I had intentionally left behind, corporate litigation and financial forensics. Julian was a creative genius, a visionary architect, but when it came to the mundane complexity of business compliance, tax shelter mechanisms, and liability waivers, he was utterly dependent on me. While I had officially shifted my focus to family management, 5 years prior, my license was still active, and my access codes to the internal firm servers, initially set up during the company's inception, had never been revoked, only upgraded. Julian relied on my expertise to manage his expense accounts, often trusting me implicitly with the vague explanations he provided. The hotel receipt, hidden inside a stack of dry cleaning tags I found 3 days after the grout incident, was the next piece of the puzzle. It wasn't the kind of high-end establishment he would use for a client dinner. It was a boutique hotel 20 minutes from the office, paid for using his personal, untraceable credit card rather than the corporate card. A late lunch hour rendezvous, short and sordid. I scanned the receipt, cross-referenced the timestamp with his digital calendar, which I had access to for scheduling optimization, and confirmed the window of betrayal. I didn't need the mistress's name, not yet. What I needed was to understand the structural weaknesses of Julian's world. I realized Julian had grown incredibly lax about documentation. When he was fully focused on his career years ago, he was meticulous. Now, distracted by clandestine meetings and the management of his double life, He was leaving gaping holes in his regulatory paperwork, especially regarding the massive municipal infrastructure project, the lighthouse contract that was set to double his firm's valuation. This contract was everything to him, the culmination of his life's work. I began a methodical, non-destructive audit of his firm's digital ledger and his personal investments. The picture that emerged was stark. Julian had leveraged everything on the lighthouse project, pouring all our liquid assets and taking out significant lines of credit, trusting that the momentum and the sheer size of the deal would cover any procedural gaps. I spent countless nights reviewing property deeds, corporate minutes, and the complex web of trusts we had established years ago for estate planning. I noted which entities I solely controlled, which were joint, and which held significant, previously unknown liabilities. I wasn't gathering evidence for a 50-50 split in divorce court. I was isolating the weak points of his foundation, ensuring that when the hammer finally fell, it would strike directly at the load-bearing walls of his entire existence. The slow burn wasn't about catching him. It was about preparing the explosives. And the preparation required a level of legal acumen he had long forgotten I possessed. The third move was entirely focused on financial triage, cloaked under the guise of Julian, consumed by the exhilaration of his affair and the stress of the low-cost it was easy to manipulate the project. I drafted several amendments to our standing revocable trusts and proposed the creation of two new corporate holding companies structured to shield specific assets from potential future litigation, common practice in this high-risk industry. I assured him, we need to be aggressive with appreciation of the asset. I murmured one evening over a dinner at a dish that always made me feel prosperous and secure. The lighthouse deal puts a massive target. We need to reinforce assets He barely glanced at the 40 pages of legal text, signing with a flourish of checking his phone, presumably texting the woman who occupied his stolen house. Within a week, the core of my long-term strategy was set. The two new holding companies, LLC Omega and Trust Delta, while appearing to be jointly managed, have embedded clauses in the operating agreements that granted me, as the designated manager and primary trustee, respectively, unilateral dissolution authority in the event of material breach of fiduciary duty, a phrase broad enough to encompass marital misconduct, especially given the state's loose interpretations of joint trust agreements. Critically, I transferred the substantial down payment Julian recently received from the Lighthouse project into LLC Omega for short-term, high-yield municipal bond investment, a move that technically lowered the reported capital of his primary firm, making it appear less solid while protecting the funds under my sole administrative control. The most crucial change, however, was in the title of the primary residence. Although Julian had contributed significantly to the mortgage, I had purchased the house outright years before, funding the initial deposit with inheritance money. I now shifted the title ownership entirely into Trust Delta, establishing it as an irrevocable spousal and future descendant asset. Julian signed off on this, believing it protected the house from his business creditors. What he didn't realize was that in the event of a divorce, it protected the house entirely from him, guaranteeing my continued occupancy and eliminating one of his largest presumed assets from the marital estate pool. I even made sure to send his personal assistant a detailed email outlining the updated corporate structure for compliance records, ensuring a digital footprint confirmed his awareness and approval of the moves. He was happily signing away his future, piece by piece, believing I was the devoted guardian of his wealth. The deeper I buried the legal trap, the calmer I became. My revenge was going to be so quiet. He wouldn't hear it until the ceiling fell in. The tension, for me, was not emotional, but intellectual, the strain of maintaining the facade of the doting, oblivious wife while maneuvering complex corporate law. For Julian, however, the pressure was starting to mount, and I was the subtle engineer of his stress. I introduced the concept of external professional scrutiny. Julian's lighthouse project was enormous, attracting significant public attention. I used my deep network of contacts from my old life, reaching out to former colleagues now working in the city planning and compliance department. I didn't directly accuse Julian of anything. Instead, I posed as the concerned spouse, gently inquiring about standard due diligence processes for contracts of this magnitude, expressing minor anxieties about the speed at which Julian was moving and the high-risk nature of the deal. Julian is so focused on the design, he sometimes overlooks the paperwork. I would confide casually to a former rival who now sat on the city's audit committee. I just want to make sure he hasn't missed any necessary environmental impact statements or zoning variances that could come back to bite him. These inquiries were subtle, framed as preventative measures, but they were powerful enough to trigger a routine, bureaucratic slowdown. A low-level compliance review was initiated, standard procedure, but perfectly timed. Julian started receiving queries from the city planning office demanding supplementary documentation, revised timelines, and detailed audits of his subcontractors, the very things I knew he had rushed or neglected while spending hours at the boutique hotel. He became irritable and highly stressed, working 12-hour days at the office. The affair, instead of being a source of relaxation, became another source of pressure, forcing him to juggle his lies alongside his professional deadlines. He didn't suspect me. Instead, he railed against petty bureaucrats and the system trying to sabotage success. When he came home exhausted, I would be waiting ready with a meticulously researched set of regulatory precedents and comforting advice. Just give them the documentation they need, darling, I'd say, massaging his neck. I'll organize everything for you tonight. Just show them we are completely transparent and compliant. He would hand over piles of disorganized files, effectively giving me full control over what information was presented and, crucially, what wasn't. I used this opportunity to deliberately delay the submission of certain sensitive financial documents that detailed the precise allocation of the city's initial mobilization payment, the funds I had already secured inside LLC Omega. This delay wouldn't derail the contract, but it would ensure the city's scrutiny peaked exactly when I needed it to, right after the final, high-stakes contract signing. Julian saw me as his indispensable lifeline, the strategic mind protecting him from the external world. He never once considered that the threat was already inside the house, organizing his paperwork. The emotional distance between us was now vast, a cold, silent chasm. Julian was barely functional, relying on my meticulous care for both his personal well-being and his professional survival. He had become utterly reliant on the comforting myth of my unflinching support. He would come home late, smelling vaguely of cheap air freshener from the rental car he sometimes used for his trysts, too tired even to manage a plausible lie. He'd collapse onto the sofa, muttering about bureaucratic nightmares, and I would bring him a whiskey, listening intently to his complaints, nodding sympathetically at the stress I was actively manufacturing. The contrast between my genuine calmness and his rising panic was intoxicatingly quiet. This was the point where the moral ambiguity of my actions became something I had to reckon with. Though I quickly dismissed any guilt, he had invited this judgment through his actions, and I was merely acting as the executioner of consequences he himself had set in motion. He thought he deserved happiness outside the bounds of our commitment without consequence. I intended to show him the cost of that entitlement. It was during this intense period of emotional dissonance that I reached the final, crucial step in securing our assets, the ownership of the lighthouse project's main site. Julian, in his haste to secure the initial zoning rights, had purchased a small, key parcel of land adjoining the main city development area. He bought it under his name, using liquid funds from a joint savings account. While reviewing the title insurance and easement documents, I noted that the language around future sales and liabilities was surprisingly loose, another sign of his distraction. I proposed we transfer the parcel into the name of Trust Delta, the irrevocable trust one had established for future children. It's a huge liability reduction. Julian, I explained, if the project goes south, this valuable land won't be exposed to the firm's creditors. It's a clean asset. He agreed instantly. Once transferred, that key piece of real estate, essential for the project's final phase, was completely out of his reach. The irony was suffocating. He was sealing the fate of his own professional future to protect his mistress, thinking he was protecting us. He had traded marital fidelity for professional security, and I had ensured he would lose both. Asterisk, this whole situation raises a fascinating moral question. When betrayal happens, is the silent, strategic response, the slow, calculated dismantling of the offender's life, more damaging or even more ethical than the immediate, explosive confrontation? If you've been in a high-stakes situation, did silence or noise ultimately win the day? Share your thoughts below. Asterisk, this slow burn was agonizingly detailed, requiring daily micro-adjustments and relentless maintenance of the facade. I had to ensure he never doubted my loyalty, even as I was building the scaffold for his demise. Every kind word, every supportive touch, was another layer of insulating material around the bomb I was about to detonate beneath him. His exhaustion was palpable, but mine was the cold, focused fatigue of a surgeon operating perfectly under pressure, knowing the procedure was irreversible. The setup for the climax required precise execution, a performance worthy of an Oscar. Julian was scheduled to attend the final closing ceremony for the lighthouse contract on Friday morning. This was the signature moment, the handshake that would release the final tranche of municipal funding and cement his reputation as one of the city's foremost architects. I insisted on being there. As your counsel, darling, I said sweetly, I need to ensure the final language protects you fully. And besides, I want to be there to celebrate. Julian loved the optics of the supportive, legally savvy wife and readily agreed. Over the preceding week, I had made subtle, critical changes to the massive 500-page contract. The municipal contract was structured in phases, and the closing documents stipulated that all previous phases had been certified compliant. However, in the section detailing personal indemnification and liability, a section Julian routinely ignored, trusting me to manage it, I inserted an aggressive clause. This clause stated that should any regulatory audits conducted by the city post-signing reveal material misrepresentation or misallocation of funds from previous phases, Julian, as the signing principal, would be held personally and immediately liable for all remedial costs, fines, and the clawback of the initial mobilization payment. This was a deviation from the standard corporate liability structure, but nested deep within complex legal jargon, it appeared merely to be an aggressive protection for the municipality. Julian, already worn down by the preliminary audit queries I had instigated, was eager to get the contract signed and put the administrative headache behind him. The city's legal team, already trusting my reputation and finding the language excessively beneficial to their side, raised no flags. They assumed my presence guaranteed due diligence. The most critical element of the setup, however, was timing. I had coordinated with my contact at the City Planning Audit Department. The official release of the internal audit report, the one detailing Julian's rushed, incomplete, and sometimes outright falsified compliance documents from the earlier phases of the Lighthouse project, was scheduled for 9:45 a.m. on Friday. Julian's contract closing was set for 9:30 a.m. He needed exactly 15 minutes of blissful ignorance after the signature was applied before the public record released the information that would indict him. I spent Thursday night preparing two separate documents. A perfectly formatted, crisp binder of documents for the contract signed, and a slim, pre-filed document labeled petition for immediate dissolution and restraining order. The quiet confidence that filled me was not malice. It was the satisfaction of mathematical precision. Every variable was accounted for. Every document notarized. Every betrayal catalogued. Julian was walking into a room, believing he was about to sign the capstone of his career. He was, in fact, walking into a highly choreographed legal execution. And I was the conductor. Thursday night was steeped in a surreal calm. Julian arrived home late, agitated but buoyant. He had had a final celebratory dinner with the mistress, a fact I knew only because I tracked his burner phone usage, which had seen an uptick in late-night, untraceable calls. He was tired, slightly drunk, and radiating the careless confidence of a man who believed he had successfully outrun his consequences. "Clara, darling, I need you to just confirm that final liability section one last time," he requested, tossing the massive binder onto the dining table. "My eyes are blurring. It's all just boilerplate, right?" I slid the binder toward me, already knowing the contents verbatim. I pretended to scan the relevant pages, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the text I had deliberately inserted. "Absolutely standard, Julian," I assured him, keeping my voice low and soothing. "It's aggressive, but it protects us from competitor lawsuits down the line, ensuring any fallout is absorbed by the insurance, not our personal wealth." He sighed in relief, the lie sliding down easy as silk. "Thank God for you, Clara. I honestly don't know how I'd manage this side of the business without your cool head." The irony of him thanking me for managing the very clause that would destroy him tasted like ash and victory. I offered him his favorite cognac and insisted he relax. I told him I would wake up early and handle the final arrangements, ensuring his briefcase was packed with the necessary signed corporate seals and the contract binder. He kissed me, a tired, perfunctory gesture, and stumbled off to bed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, lit only by the monitor's glow, ensuring the final paperwork for the divorce was in order. I had arranged for a process server to be waiting outside the City Hall conference room at 10 a.m. sharp. My final preparatory step was a discreet text message sent from a prepaid phone line to Chloe, the mistress. The text was short and direct. "Julian is ruined. Check the city audit results at 9:45 a.m. tomorrow." He signed a personal guarantee. "Don't let him drag you down." I didn't need her to do anything. I just needed to ensure that when Julian finally reached for comfort, that line would already be cut. I watched the clock tick past midnight, the silence of the house magnified by the magnitude of the event I had set in motion. Julian was sleeping soundly 20 feet away, dreaming of success and perhaps the soft skin of another woman. He had reached the end of his easy road, and in a few short hours, he would hit the wall I had spent months quietly constructing. The morning of the closing was unnaturally bright. We arrived at the opulent City Hall conference room precisely at 9:15 a.m. Julian was impeccable, his ego inflated by the impending success. He shook hands with the mayor's representative, the city attorney, and the head of the Planning Commission, all unaware that they were witnessing not a triumph, but a beautifully timed catastrophe. I sat beside him, silent and attentive, playing the role of the quiet counsel. The meeting proceeded smoothly. The city attorney read the summary clauses, ensuring all parties understood the magnitude and the responsibilities of the lighthouse contract. Julian, eager to be done, kept pushing toward the signature page. At 9:40 a.m., the city attorney announced, "All due diligence has been reviewed, and we are ready to proceed." Julian picked up the pen, a smug look of final, undisputed victory washing over his face. He signed the contract with a heavy, confident stroke. I watched the ink dry, a small, private smile playing on my lips. The contract was closed. The city's financial obligation was activated. The firm, Julian's legacy, was now tied irrevocably to the document. The time was 9:42 a.m. The city attorney began a boilerplate celebratory speech about community partnership, and Julian was basking in the applause. I reached into my purse, not for my phone, but for the small, discreet satellite phone I had purchased for this moment. At 9:45 a.m. precisely, it vibrated in my palm, a signal from my contact that the audit results were officially uploaded to the public records database. I waited exactly 3 minutes, allowing the moment of victory to sink deeply into Julian's memory. At 9:48 a.m., the city attorney's assistant, who had been glancing nervously at her phone, gasped softly. The head of the Planning Commission's phone rang, a private number, and he quickly excused himself. The air in the room, previously thick with celebration, turned sharply cold. Then, the city attorney received the call. His face drained of color. He put the phone down, his eyes fixed on Julian, and the celebration was extinguished. The 18 minutes had begun. "Mr. Thorne," the attorney started, his voice suddenly hard and formal, "we have just received the public release of the Phase 1 compliance audit. There appear to be significant material discrepancies in your documentation regarding the environmental impact funding and the allocation of the initial mobilization payment. Specifically, the report indicates potential willful misrepresentation of over $4.5 million. Julian laughed, an involuntary, high-pitched sound. "That's impossible. That audit was weeks ago. We fixed everything. Clara, darling, tell them." But I just sat there, my face an expressionless mask of professional detachment. The city attorney continued, pointing a trembling finger at the freshly signed document. "And according to Clause 47.b, which you personally reviewed and signed, Mr. Thorne, your firm, and you personally are immediately and retroactively liable for the full remediation, fines, and immediate repayment of the $12 million initial funding tranche until all discrepancies are resolved. As of this moment, the contract is nullified, and the city is filing a forfeiture order against your firm's remaining capital." Julian's face went through 3 distinct phases: disbelief, panic, and then a terrifying, silent rage directed entirely at me. "Clara, what did you do? You were supposed to review this. You said it was fine." His voice was a strangled whisper, amplified by the stunned silence of the city officials. I stood up slowly, calmly adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit jacket. I met his eye, not with anger, but with the weary finality of a judge delivering a life sentence. "Julian," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension, "I did review it. I reviewed every single word. I placed the petition for immediate dissolution and restraining order, the pre-signed divorce documents, and a letter from my personal legal counsel directly onto the table, sliding them across the mahogany until they rested against his trembling hand. I reviewed it knowing this was coming. and I ensured that the liability rested precisely where it belonged, with the person who breached every fiduciary duty, professional and marital. The city attorney stared, aghast. Julian didn't even register the divorce papers yet. He was fixated on the $4.5 million fraud accusation and the $12 million clawback that had just vaporized his firm's operating capital. He scrambled for his phone, desperate to call his personal lawyer, the one I used to refer to him, the one who was also now officially on retainer for me. He found the number, but before he could dial, the phone buzzed loudly in his hand. It was Chloe. He answered immediately, his voice desperate. "Chloe, baby, listen to me. There's been a mistake, a massive problem." I reached across the table and plucked the phone from his grasp, placing it on speaker. "Hello, Chloe," I said sweetly. "This is Clara." A pause stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. "Clara, what the hell is going on?" "Julian, the news is everywhere. The audit, the money. Is this true?" Julian stammered, trying to regain control. "It's a minor legal hiccup, Chloe. Nothing I can't fix. I just need a little time." Chloe's voice was suddenly cold, stripped of its previous flirtation. "A little time? Julian, I just read the report. You're ruined. You just signed away your personal assets. Look, I'm not signing up for bankruptcy. I thought you were successful. We're done. I'm blocking your number. Don't ever call me again." She hung up with a sharp click. The final pillar of his psychological security crumbled. He watched the phone, then me. The clock was ticking down the final few minutes. He realized, too late, that he had lost the mistress. He was losing the money. Now, he finally looked down at the divorce papers. The reality of the full, organized loss began to hit him. He was standing naked in a courtroom, and the judge had been working for the opposition the entire time. The remaining moments of the 18 minutes were pure theater, the final, devastating explanation of how profoundly he had miscalculated. Julian finally pushed the corporate chaos aside and focused solely on the divorce filing. His voice was raw, wounded. "The house. At least we have the house. And the accounts. Half of everything. Clara, you can't take it all." I shook my head slowly, pitying the depth of his ignorance. "Julian, do you remember Trust Delta? The irrevocable trust we set up to protect the residents from creditors. The one you signed 3 weeks ago? That trust is now the sole legal title holder of the property, and the beneficiaries are me and any potential children we may have. Given the state of our marriage and the evidence of your ongoing infidelity, a judge will easily rule that the trust's purpose to protect me and the marital legacy is best served by excluding you entirely. You signed the house away, Julian, to protect yourself from the professional fallout that I coincidentally managed to ensure happened." I moved on to his business assets. The firm's liquid capital, the $12 million mobilization payment the city is now clawing back. I transferred that into LLC Omega weeks ago. Remember, for aggressive tax shielding, while the city will successfully seize your firm's accounts to cover the fine, the $12 million is legally held within LLC Omega, under my administrative control, secured by that clause you overlooked, the one giving me unilateral control upon breach of fiduciary duty. I am not filing for a 50-50 split of the marital estate, Julian. I am filing for divorce based on fault, seeking punitive damages, and retaining the majority of the assets I already secured under my legal purview. You signed the documents. You consented to the legal structure. You just didn't read the fine print. He looked around the room at the city attorney, who was now furiously taking notes for the impending civil suit, at the mayor's representative, who looked disgusted, and back at me, He had lost his career, his mistress, his reputation, and now the entirety of his financial standing. He had traded everything for a sordid affair, and the woman he scorned had packaged up his entire life and quietly walked away with the deed. The process server, right on time, slipped into the room, walked directly to Julian, and formally served him the final, thick stack of legal documents. Julian watched the final act of his demolition with vacant eyes. The 18 minutes were up. His life was gone, not with a bang, but with the quiet, cold precision of a legal filing. The realization was complete. He had lost absolutely everything, and he had been forced to witness it minute by agonizing minute in front of the people who mattered most to his professional life. The silence in the room was absolute, the final echo of his defeat. I collected my briefcase, gave a small, formal nod to the stunned city officials, and walked out, leaving Julian sitting alone at the table, surrounded by the remnants of his ruin.